The War of the Ring. The crucial battles and strategic movements in Tolkien's masterpiece. Hello and welcome back to another video from Secrets of the Rings, where we celebrate and delve deep into all things Tolkien. Join us today as we explore the major event of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the War of the Ring. Who took part in the fighting? Where were the major battles fought? How long did it last? Let's look at the history of the war and its characters, as well as its significance in the history of Middle-earth. If you enjoy our videos, please like and subscribe for more content, and let us know what you would like to see more of. The War of the Ring was an event that defined and concluded the Third Age of Middle-earth. Thousands of years of conflict developed into this clash with the Dark Lord Sauron, making his final claim for control. It was long before the first battles were fought that the foundations were laid for war. In the Second Age, Sauron spent a great deal of effort in his pursuit for domination. This effort included his influencing of the elves to create the Rings of Power, 3 of which would belong to and stay with them. 100 years later, he would forge the One Ring to grant himself dominion over those who wore the others, thus declaring himself as their adversary again. The Second Age concluded with the War of the Last Alliance, where the union of elves and men successfully destroyed Sauron and his armies. The One Ring, however, was not destroyed by Isildur, the Prince of Gondor, nor were the foundations of Barad-dûr, the Dark Lord's tower in Mordor. For 1,000 years or so, Sauron's spirit wandered the realm before he would begin rebuilding his military strength. Dol Guldur, formerly Amon Lanc, would serve as his initial fortress, where he dwelt as a darkness referred to as the Necromancer. The White Council drove him out in 2941, at the same time as another important prelude to the events of the War of the Ring, the quest of Erebor. Gandalf's intention in conspiring with the dwarves would prove successful in thwarting Sauron in a number of ways. The death of Smaug removed him as an ally to Sauron, especially during the time of the White Council's attack at Dol Guldur. The alliance of Smaug and Sauron would have made securing the north nearly impossible. This allowed Dale and Erebor to rebuild and cut off any northern pass to Angmar for enemy forces. Lastly, Bilbo Baggins acquired the One Ring from Gollum, setting in motion the events that would lead to the Fellowship of the Ring. As a military conflict, the War of the Ring was spread out on several fronts, and some were far more active than others. Mordor's attacks on Gondor were the most significant. The first official battle was fought on June 20th, 3018, when the forces of Sauron attacked the city of Osgiliath, a vital crossing point of the Anduin River, and the only one for many miles. In a probing attack on the weakening kingdom of men, the Witch King of Angmar faced off against the sons of Denethor II, Boromir and Faramir. The attack would lead to the destruction of the bridge that split the city into the east and west, preventing the enemy from further advancement. Much of the Gondorian forces did not survive the battle, and the east was lost. But Boromir and Faramir did survive, fighting nearly to the last man. In the following months, Faramir would serve as a ranger in the lands of Ithilien, where enemies often traveled to or from the Black Gate. This first battle would precede much greater conflicts in Gondor. Meanwhile, in the northern lands of Mirkwood, King Thranduil and the Sylvan Elves were attacked that same day by forces out of Dol Guldur. Gollum, who had been held captive there thanks to Aragorn, escaped during the chaos and would not be found by either side. During the Battle of Osgiliath, the Nazgûl managed to cross the Anduin unnoticed. They were sent in search of Gollum, the Shire, or anywhere they might be able to locate the One Ring. After being warned of them by Radagast, Gandalf goes to Isengard to seek counsel from Saruman the White. Saruman acquired control of Isengard in the late 2700s of the Third Age. Originally built by the Númenóreans, it was a long battled-for stronghold, with the men of Gondor and Rohan against the Dunlendings, a gnarly tribe of men that lived just north of Rohan. Over time, it was largely forgotten by all parties and often unmanned. Upon Saruman's return from the east, he offered to take up stay there and helped in the defense of Rohan and Gondor. The valley was thereafter known as Nan Curinir, or the Wizard's Vale. By the late 2900s, it became a breeding ground for orcs to serve in Mordor, as Saruman was by then a corrupted servant to Sauron. Through the use of a palantir, Saruman communicates with the Dark Lord, seeking to aid the winning side, yet serve his own desire for the One Ring. From Isengard, Saruman would wage war primarily against Rohan. Now that he was an openly declared villain to the Free Peoples, he moved hastily, planning to control the mind of Rohan's aging king Theoden through the treasonous efforts of the Rohan native, Grima Wormtongue. The brave culture of the kingdom was decaying fast. Meanwhile, Saruman destroys the trees of Isengard and uses the fortress to breed the Uruk-hai, a new breed of orcs under his control and capable of traveling in sunlight. The wizard also dispatched spies and raiding parties after the Fellowship in an intensified search for the ring, as well as sending ruffians to take control of the Shire. The Fords of Isen would host two major battles in the War of the Ring, as it was the only point that could transport large armies across the River Isen. On February 25th, Third Age 3019, Saruman sent a force of Dunlendings and Uruks after the Rohirrim, the horse lords of Rohan, with the intention of killing Theoden's heirs. The first force was destroyed by the army of Theodred, son of Theoden, who was then flanked and trapped on the isle that lay in the middle of the river. Commanded by the warrior Grimbold, another force of Rohan took the western bank, but could not save Theodred from being slaughtered, and almost died as well, before being relieved by Elfhelm's forces, driving back the Dunlendings. With the death of the prince, Theoden's nephew, Eomer, became the new heir to Rohan. A day after the first battle, Saruman's orcs had captured Merry and Pippin in search of the ring-bearer, killing Boromir in the process. Eomer, disobeying his orders, led a force of the Rohirrim after that band of orcs, coincidentally freeing the two hobbits into Fangorn Forest. There they would meet the great Treebeard, setting in motion later events at Isengard. A week later, on March 2nd, the Second Battle of the Fords of Isen was fought to retaliate against the death of Theodred. Led by Grimbold and Elfhelm, the forces of Rohan attacked, but it would not be enough. Saruman's armies overcame the attack and scattered the Rohirrim. The wizard's victories thus far, however, would not reflect his eventual doom. The same day as this battle, Gandalf arrives in Edoras and heals King Theoden from the control of Grima Wormtongue. Additionally, the Ents, the tree-like creatures of the forest, concluded a rare day-long discussion called the Entmoot. They had come to the decision that they would avenge the local tree herds that suffered from Saruman's industrial machine, arriving at Isengard that night in the last march of the Ents. On March 3rd, Theoden led a force to the Fords of Isen, including Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas, seeking to keep the fight away from his people. But they were informed of the defeat at the Second Battle of the Fords of Isen, and the troops were sent to Helm's Deep, a fortress created to guard the Gap of Rohan. There they would fight the Battle of the Hornburg. For 2 days, Saruman's forces of men and orcs made their way to the walls of Helm's Deep, and within, pushing past the rampart and climbing the walls. From within the walls, the forces of Rohan slung arrows and stones upon the massive army. Gimli and Eomer defended the glittering caves, and eventually pushed back after the wall was breached at the small culvert. It was blown up by an orc carrying Saruman's new and explosive weaponry, devised for this epic battle. Aragorn, Legolas, and the king defended the main keep. In a last effort to boost morale, they charged their way out, and along with the other forces, pushed the enemy past Helm's Dyke again. With the chance of victory still uncertain, help arrived in the form of the Hurons, other tree-like beings blocking any escape routes for the orcs, and the arrival of Gandalf, Erkenbrand, and the remaining forces from the previous battle at the Fords of Isen charging into the fray. Numerous races of Middle-earth aligned to deal a major blow to Saruman's army. Rohan would spare the lives of a number of the Dunlendings who had fought for Saruman, putting them to work instead. During the Battle of the Hornburg, the Ents and Hurons also had completed the destruction of Isengard itself in the Battle of Isengard. Driven by fury, they tore down the walls and let the fortress flood. However, The structure of Orthanc was too sturdy to be destroyed, and it would remain a prison with Saruman inside it. He was then confronted by Gandalf, Theoden, Aragorn, and others, but refused to surrender, being expelled and having his staff broken in the process, further establishing his fall from the rank of the White Wizard. Gandalf attempts to regain his alliance, but to no avail. Grima Wormtongue is also present and hurls the Palantir, or the Orthanc Stone, at King Theoden. Pippin retrieves it and is greeted by the Dark Lord. A Nazgul flies overhead and the remaining protagonists split up, with Gandalf taking Pippin to Minas Tirith with him. Aragorn and Theoden are met by the Grey Company, consisting of about 30 Dunedain Rangers, and the sons of Lord Elrond, Eladan, and Elrohir. Aragorn would use the Orthanc Stone, revealing himself to Sauron and presenting the newly acquired and reforged blade of his bloodline, Andúril, the Flame of the West. They had hoped this would pressure the Dark Lord to act quickly and less powerfully than he might have otherwise. The return of the king was not an empty threat. Aragorn and the Grey Company then left for the paths of the dead, through the White Mountains, seeking to recruit the dead men of Dunharrow to fulfill their broken oath to Isildur many lifetimes prior. Gondor was low in strength as it was, sending away some of its citizens to other fiefdoms, but Denethor would send the rallying call to gather the scattered forces of the south at Minas Tirith, while the Rohirrim rode east from Harrowdale. Much of the manpower needed was assigned to the southern front to intercept the Black Fleet of Umbar. On March 9th and 10th, black vapor spewed out of Mordor, blocking out the sun in an attempt to misguide and demoralize the people of Gondor. It would last 2 days, with the latter referred to as the Dawnless Day. That same day, Caer Andros was taken by an army of orcs from the Morannon, defeating the company of Faramir. They would unsuccessfully attempt to block off the march of the Rohirrim. By this time, the steward of Gondor had grown more and more disturbed after the passing of his favorite son Boromir, and his use of the Palantir corrupting his mind. Learning of Faramir's failure to seize the One Ring from Frodo and Sam, he sends his one surviving son to confront the Morgul host at Osgiliath, a death sentence. But Faramir rides anyway to prepare the defenses of the western half of the city. The eastern portion was commanded by Gothmog under the Witch King. Hordes of orcs and Haradrim attacked on March 11th via secret ferries and pushed Faramir's army out of the city. He would retreat to the causeway forts on the Ramas Ekor, the large bordering wall of Pelennor Field that lies between Osgiliath and Minas Tirith. Faramir could not hold the Ramas Ekor and was chased back again. This retreat proved disastrous, however, as the force of Mordor managed to catch up and attack once again, striking down Faramir near to death. His soldiers fought valiantly to protect his wounded body until Imrahil's Swan Knights reinforced the defenses, striking fear into the withdrawing orcs. Gandalf would face off against the Nazgul for a second time in those fields, showing the power of the Istari. Denethor did not take the news of his son's injury lightly and prepared a pyre for himself and Faramir to be burned alive, descending into madness, thus leaving control of the city's forces to Gandalf and Gondor without one of its greatest leaders. Faramir's defenses against Mordor bought time for Rohan to arrive. He would later survive the suicide attempt thanks to a trusted ally in Beregond, as well as Gandalf, who had left the fray of ongoing battle to attend the situation. Denethor would proceed with taking his own life that day, despite the realization that Faramir was not dead. Away in the north, Lothlorien successfully defended an attack from the orcs of Dol Guldur, as well as had the Ents in eastern Rohan the next day on March 12th. On March 13th, the siege of Gondor began. Mordor's massive army of orcs, men, trolls, and Oliphants, led by the Witch King, set up outside the walls of Minas Tirith. He tried to order the bombardment of the walls of the city to no avail, as it was built by the Númenóreans for such assaults. They slung fire and the heads of those who died at Osgiliath to kill the hope of Minas Tirith, along with the cries of the Nazgul. Aragorn and the southern Gondorian army marched to meet the fleet seeking Minas Tirith. The corsairs of Umbar had pillaged several ports along their tour north. The Battle of Pelargir ensued, as Aragorn and company caught them in the middle of such another stop, splitting up and dismantling the enemy invaders before they could reach Minas Tirith. Aragorn was joined by the mariners of Pelargir in his tour back to the capital, but would lose the support of the dead men, declaring their oaths fulfilled at last. March 15th was one of the most significant days of the War of the Ring. 3 major conflicts unfolded across multiple fronts. In the north, Dol Gulduar's second assault on Lothlorien took place and was once again thwarted by the Galadhrim. Another band of orcs simultaneously attacked Thranduil in Mirkwood, in the fiery conflict known as the Battle Under the Trees. Mordor's armies sought to prevent the alliance of the Elven kingdoms, as well as the forces in Dale and Erebor. Thranduil led a successful counterattack, however, declaring a new year of the elves in the process. Back in Gondor, the Battle of Pelennor Fields had officially begun. Siege towers along the walls spread the Gondorian forces thin and away from the Great Gate. Along with the use of magic to weaken the barrier, the Witch King crashed the great gates of Minas Tirith with the battering ram known as Grond, named for the Warhammer of Morgoth. The Witch King then came face to face with Gandalf once again atop the mighty Shadowfax. As they stood there, sizing each other up, the horn of the Rohirrim sounded, and the Witch King turned his attention to Ramas Ekor, where the riders charged. The riders of Rohan had successfully evaded the orcs and Haradrim, who had captured Caer Andros, courtesy of the Dunedain of Drudan Forest. This allowed them to arrive in time to relieve the desperate forces of Gondor. 6,000 riders stood at the North Gate as King Theoden roused them with words of courage against the unsuspecting foe. "Arise, arise, riders of Rohan! Fell deeds awake! Fire and slaughter. Spear shall be shaken, shield be splintered. A sword day, a red day, ere the sun rises. Ride now, ride now, ride to Gondor." To the chant of death, the Rohirrim charged into Pelennor Fields like a crash of thunder. They pushed through men and orcs with ease until they were met by the Witch King. He descended upon his fell beast, knocking Theoden's horse back and on top of him, mortally wounding the king. As the riders dispersed, a single warrior stood their ground, one known as Denhelm, who was the disguised niece of the king, the Lady Éowyn of Rohan, along with Merry, the hobbit. She battled with the Witch King, slaying the fell beast with one slash to its neck. The large mace of the Witch King would shatter Éowyn's shield, breaking her arm at the same time. As she faced death, Merry stabbed the leader of the Nazgul with the Arnorian blade, breaking his own arm as well. The Witch King fell to his knees as Éowyn struck the final blow to his helm, fulfilling Glorfindel's prophecy that the Witch King would not die by the hand of a man. She would then suffer the Black Breath, leaving her weakened and unconscious. Merry heard the dying words of the valiant King Theoden. Éomer took charge of the Rohirrim. Imrahil led the Swan Knights from the Great Gates to support Éomer's riders, but they could not successfully join forces. As the inevitability of defeat loomed over the west, the Black Fleet of Umbar arrived at Harlond on the Anduin River, all but ensuring their end. However, it would be Aragorn and the southern Gondorian army that departed those ships and charged into battle. The heir to Gondor, wielding the Flame of the West, destroyed the host of Mordor with Imrahil and Éomer's forces to end the Battle of Pelennor Fields. After the victory, both sides of the War of the Ring found themselves with significant losses. But this time, the garrison at Minas Tirith was still at its largest. The leadership of Aragorn would see him deflect the crowning of king until the people were free of Sauron. He spent time earning his love from the citizens of Gondor with his skills in healing before eventually departing to end the war once and for all. On March 17th, a year after receiving threats from Sauron's minions for refusing fealty or to give information pertaining to the Shire, the forces of Erebor and Dale would defend against those threats in the battle. An Easterling host of 20,000 men from Rhûn invaded Dale, drawing out King Bran's force of 3,500 men and the army of 2,500 dwarves under Dain II's command. They met before the Easterlings could breach the walls of Dale and fought for 3 straight days. Eventually, the advantage in numbers would help the Easterlings push back the dwarves and men past the walls of Erebor. King Brand was slain, as well as King Dain II, who stood over Bard's body in furious defense for as long as he could, slaying many foes. Now under siege, the retreated forces had hope for victory only in the men of the West, who had departed Gondor on March 18th after the last debate. On March 22nd, the final attack on Lothlorien was fought off by the Elven warriors with assistance from Galadriel's ring, Nenya. 2 days later, after sending a small force to liberate Caer Andros, the host of the West arrived at the Morannon. The outlook of victory then was still bleak, but the work of Frodo and Sam behind the scenes had been culminating in their ever closer arrival to the fires of Orodruin with the One Ring. The last debate saw a council of the wisest leaders left in Gondor to discuss the next moves in the War of the Ring. Despite much hesitation, Gandalf successfully pleaded to Aragorn to draw out the forces of Mordor and allow the Ring-Bearer to complete his mission undetected. They would serve as bait to save Frodo and Sam. Before then, Aragorn challenged the keepers of Minas Morgul, but heard no response, leaving some men there and destroying the bridge to prevent any further attacks from that city. Sauron had sent the bulk of his forces to the Black Gate, assuming Aragorn possessed the ring. After defeating a host of Easterlings in Ithilien, the Battle of the Morannon was set to commence. 6,000 men lined the Morannon in fear and against all odds. The mouth of Sauron had his request for surrender refused by the leaders of the West, and the incredibly overwhelming force of men, orcs, and trolls rolled out for war. The host of the West was split to 2 sides of the battlefield, along 2 hills. Imrahil and Eomer commanded one hill, while Aragorn and Gandalf led the other. Fighting ensued atop these 2 hills before the remaining Nazgûl arrived on their fell beasts. Gwaihir and the great eagles dueled the Nazgûl in the skies above Mordor. Armored trolls wreaked havoc on the first lines of defense, breaking the lines and allowing orcs to flank the 2 hills. As the desperate battle unfolded on the plains of Morannon, Sam carried Frodo to the cracks of doom. But Frodo would fail to destroy the One Ring, placing it on his finger instead and attracting Sauron's full attention away from the fighting. The forces of evil that assailed the men on the hills were distracted, allowing them a chance to regroup. As Frodo stood with the One Ring, he was attacked by Gollum, who reclaimed the ring from Frodo. Fortunately for the fate of the Free Peoples, Gollum slipped and fell in his excitement, allowing the One Ring to once and for all be destroyed on March 25th, Third Age, 3019. The Nazgûl were killed in the destructive blast of Mount Doom, and Sauron was destroyed, along with any chance of his dominion over Middle-earth. Out on the plains, confused orcs panicked and fled the battle, while some Easterlings continued to fight. Aragorn thereafter slayed the remaining orcs within Mordor and freed the slaves, granting them lands to the south. Mordor was cleansed of its infectious inhabitants. Back at Erebor, where the dwarves and men of Dale remained besieged, the new kings in Bard II and Thorin III Stonehelm completed a counterattack that drove out the uninspired Easterlings. On March 28th, Celeborn and Galadriel crossed the Anduin and attacked Dol Guldur, along with Thranduil and the Elves of Mirkwood. In a great display of magical power, Lady Galadriel destroyed the foundations of Dol Guldur forever. A week or so later, Celeborn and Thranduil met in the forests of Mirkwood, agreeing to divide the land for the Beornings to dwell in. The men of the West had prevailed over the corruption of Sauron, freeing the realm of his malice. Aragorn would be crowned on May 1st, becoming the first High King of the reunited Kingdom of Men, with Arwen at his side after committing herself to a mortal life for him. The rest of the elves continued to depart for the Undying Lands, eventually being joined by members of the Fellowship, including Frodo, Gandalf, Gimli, and of course, Legolas. Months after the coronation, King Elessar, as Aragorn had come to be known, and a host of others travelled towards Rivendell, with Gandalf and the hobbits diverging from the host and heading toward the Shire. As it turns out, during the final months of fighting, Saruman had used the remaining magic in his voice to gain freedom from Treebeard's overwatch, heading for the Shire. He sought to create another center of industrial might, much like he had at Isengard. The peaceful hills of the hobbits were scorched and defiled in what is known as the Scouring of the Shire. Gandalf and the hobbits learned of these events from the men in Bree, who had been forced to repel Saruman's minions themselves. The hobbits arrived to see the home they fought desperately for destroyed. Now filled with courage, and after a long, successful journey, they roused the Shire folk to challenge Saruman's ruffians in the Battle of Bywater on November 3rd, 3rd Age 3019. After killing the leader of the ruffians and arresting more, a second wave was sent upon the hobbits, only to be trapped and defeated as well. The hobbits then confront Saruman, who had until this point remained unknown, using the alias of Sharky. The powerless wizard was exiled, but in his rage attacked Grima Wormtongue. Grima then slit the throat of his former master, ending Saruman's life before being shot by arrows and killed as well. With that victory, the War of the Ring was officially concluded, and the free peoples of Middle-earth entered the Fourth Age of Arda. The ramifications of the War of the Ring saw the rebuilding of Arnor and the relationships of dwarves, elves, and men restored. Aragorn, Imrahil, and Éomer continued campaigns against the men of Rhûn, Harad, and Umbar, ending the destructive reign of corrupted men. The Shire became an independent land as well, belonging solely to the hobbits. Isengard was granted to the Ents. Éomer and Imrahil's daughter Lothariel wed and ruled Rohan, as did Faramir and Éowyn, then ruling Gondor. Elven kingdoms faded in power, with the magic of the rings no longer there, but dwarven kingdoms were restored with the help of men. Aragorn would live until 120 of the Fourth Age, with Arwen passing the year after. They had produced a son named Eldarion, who carried on the golden age his parents had forged in the war against the Dark Lord. And so ends the story of the War of the Ring. The free peoples of Middle-earth managed to survive years of corruption and war, saving the beauty of Arda for that much longer. What do you think was the most fascinating battle? Who are your favorite heroes in the war? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks again for joining us in another exploration of Tolkien's Legendarium, and stay tuned for more fascinating videos. Be sure to like and subscribe, and give us a follow on Instagram at Secrets of the Rings. Until next time, Namarie.